how was this transition for you? And how do you see that moment for the Russians and for you as a Russian going to North America?
I would say, well, it was pretty catastrophic because everything you knew sort of fell apart very quickly, and it's kind of interesting thinking about well, not just Russia, but how you seem to have this very, seemingly functioning system in a very large country with a large population, and within months, everything just collapses on multiple levels, right? Not just politically, but socioeconomically too. So I would have to go back to the Soviet Union. And normally, we kind of know the type of propaganda there is about the Soviet Union in the West officially. I would say maybe within the academia, it's a little bit more nuanced, where people sort of separate Soviet history from 1917 to 1991 into periods. And so I like to look at it as the revolutionary period is sort of longer than what people describe. They sort of say, well, by 1921, the Civil War was over. The Soviet Union was sort of this peaceful place. But I would actually take it almost all the way to World War II, because there was really significant social political restructuring with Stalin. And so obviously when you have a revolution, you can look at revolutions in multiple places in France and America. They're violent things. So people like to look at the sort of the late Lenin period going into the Stalinist period as, being really ruthless, which of course it was, but it was a revolutionary period. So there's kind of this logic of a revolution that is operating there. But after World War II, the Soviet Union was really, by many parameters, a good place to live. In terms of social opportunities, sort of this really stable social protection, jobs, for children, the education was amazing, university, free, extracurricular pursuits, et cetera, et cetera. So, of course, this is what people were used to. Now, yes, there was, a certain level of censorship. This was technically a one-party state, blah, blah, blah. We all know that. But in terms of social stability and sort of the socioeconomics, culture, et cetera, it was a good place to live, which is why a lot of... Pardon? Go ahead. Well, this is why a lot of people miss it today. They sort of have had that comparison to a more neoliberal sort of economics, not just of the 90s, but, Russia is still obviously a semi-capitalist society today. So they kind of have that comparison between how they lived, especially maybe not necessarily the older generation, like really, much older, but even people who are in their, let's say, 40s, 50s, kind of see how they lived, how their family lived, what they remember personally, what their families remember, word of mouth, and they can compare the two. This is why they miss the Soviet Union, because of that stability, because of being able to have many social guarantees of, free healthcare, really long vacations, really long maternity leaves, high literacy rates that skyrocketed as soon as the Soviet Union was established, albeit, violently. So this is what people are thinking of. So I would say, looking at the period of the sort of the late 1980s, even though, you had Gorbachev with his perestroika trying to really reformat in a very, I would say, misguided way, a system that did need some changes for sure, which is why you see sort of China surviving that period and the Soviet Union collapsing, sadly. So obviously China succeeded, the USSR did not. But I would say generally that period was, life-wise, was quite good for the majority of the population. So when you have that social stability, you have, free university education, vacations, extracurricular pursuits. And then all of a sudden, everything just falls apart under the banner of, freedom and all the good things coming from the West, because there was this myth of the West. It was definitely idealized. But the reality was quite, starkly different from what was being promised. It is really shocking. And so, now to take it to my family, my parents are scientists. So they were definitely, they're working for the state, they're working for universities. All of a sudden, the funding is gone. What do? Some of their friends started working, doing business, right? In basically import export. There was this joke about import and export. So they would, they would travel to Poland. They would buy cheap products from the West. They would bring them back and sell them at, at the markup in Russia. So that's how they're making a living. My parents were not interested in doing that. They wanted to continue doing science. They were sort of, they're both PhDs, chemistry, biochemistry. So they're sort of, they really liked their professions as well. They didn't just want to, switch to this sort of lower level survival mode like some people did. So because my father was well known, he had been traveling to conferences and stuff, I would say in the late 80s. So he had a lot of connections. So he was part of this really great brain drain that took place in the 90s. And I would say early 2000s too. So he was invited to live in several countries. He ended up choosing Canada because Canada at the time also had a very good social sort of welfare system in terms of, the university education was cheap, healthcare was state funded, in contrast to the US. So that's where we ended up moving. So it was definitely an economic decision first and foremost, like how do we survive? How do we not starve to death? But also, obviously, both parents wanted to continue pursuing their professional goals, which they ended up doing. And, my father spoke English well. That was his second language. Obviously, he has a thick Russian accent. But my mother spoke 4 other languages, but not English. So just imagine, you're an immigrant, you're a PhD, you're a professor, you're teaching chemistry, you're doing chemical research, and then you end up in Canada and you speak not a single word of English. So, that is obviously a lot of immigrants have this experience coming from other countries. They sort of have to start from bottom up. But that was her experience. She learned English, and within 7 years, she was back to teaching chemistry in English at a university level, which was pretty impressive for, an adult. Yes. So yeah, I would say there's, two things, socioeconomics and secondary was their professional background, wanting to continue to do their research, et cetera, et cetera. So